Tube Crowley here. I wanted to make this short video extolling the virtues of heat shrink tubing. A number of years ago, I would visit Boeing Surplus, which at that time was just a few miles south of me in Kent, and I was able to buy an enormous variety of heat shrink tubing that they would sell by the pound. I don't know if they were using these different kinds of heat shrink on aircraft or if they were using them in the machine tools that built the aircraft. But in any event, you can see that Boeing used a wide variety of different sizes and colors of heat shrink tubing. And because I buy this at the pound, I could kind of experiment with things I could do with it. So here was one of my first experiments. I started to put heat shrink tubing on tool handles. This is a 1 1/8 inch wrench, which I've just taken a black Sharpie and put the dimensions of the wrench on both sides, so it's immediately obvious what size the wrench is. And you can see I've done the same thing with these smaller wrenches. You can differentiate them with different colors of Sharpie if you want to make them even more unique. One advantage that the Sharpie has is that it can act sort of like a shrinky dink, in that you can actually write on the heat shrink tubing before you shrink it, and that will cause the color to become a little bit more saturated as it shrinks down. You can also personalize tools by name, or really with any words you want to put on the tool. This is my name, and so if you work in a shop with a number of other employees, you can personalize it by name. I also started experimenting with tool handles. This is a file handle. One of the problems with conventional files, they often don't come with handles. And so you either have to buy a handle, or in this case I just made one. I welded on some steel rods, and welded on steel rods wouldn't provide a very nice aesthetic shape or texture for a handle, so I covered those steel rods with some heat shrink tubing. And it's a little bit irregular, so in terms of aesthetics it's not perfect, but it is definitely very functional as far as providing a very solid handle for a file at a very low cost. One of the kinds of heat shrink that you can get is heat shrink that has an adhesive backing. And this is more or less an experiment. I took a piece of heat shrink tubing that had an adhesive backing and wrote on with a Sharpie, and then discovered that the adhesive was tenacious enough to adhere to a slick material like this polyethylene. So this is just a little Tupperware box I use to hold a multimeter, and over the years it's adhered just fine. So some heat shrink tubing has an adhesive on it, which makes it really worthwhile and tenacious. Some heat shrink tubing used for electronics is a little bit unique. This is a heat shrink that has been pre-crimped. Again, I don't know for a fact that it was used, but I presume it was used to terminate wires. And so what I decided to do with that was make an improvised aglet. I cut down the shoelace on this new pair of tennis shoes I got here, and put it on with heat shrink with a heat gun, and so far it's been very tenacious and hasn't come off. I've only had it for a few days, but so far it seems to work well, and if it ever did come off, I've got plenty more of these, so that's a worthwhile addition. Here's an example of a tool handle that's a little bit more aesthetic than some of my previous attempts with the files. This is just a chisel handle. The handle that I'm most proud of is this tool, which is an improvised tool I use to stir the oil at the bottom of a peanut butter jar. This is a piece of 5/16 stainless steel rod, which I heated this end and pounded it down and shaped it a little bit and polished it. So it's polished stainless steel rod, but I simply found a series of dimensions that fit over the successively larger size of the handle and built it up. So this is probably about 7 or 8 layers of heat shrink tubing that have been built up to create one handle. But the point is that if you pay attention to what you're doing, you can actually create a reasonably aesthetic handle by building up layers of heat shrink tubing. One of the more interesting uses I discovered was to personalize a small artifact like this. This is just the nail clippers. It's a little bit better texture for gripping, especially if your hands are wet. But more importantly, if you live with someone and you both use nail clippers, you may want to differentiate your nail clippers from the other person's nail clippers. So that's one way you can do it. You could use a Sharpie or a different color to personalize it. So those are just a few things that I've discovered that can be done with the versatile material of heat shrink tubing. So again, Matt the Tube Crowley, thank you.